The sky over King's Landing was dark that day. The crowd had gathered in the square, shouting and throwing things, waiting for the fall of a man who once stood for honor. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, was on his knees. His hair was messy, his face tired, but his eyes still strong. Joffrey Baratheon, young and cruel, sat on the Iron Throne. He had just said the words everyone feared. "Bring me his head." But something happened. Before the executioner's sword came down, chaos broke out. A small group of men, silent, quick, and deadly, rushed in. Arrows flew. The crowd screamed. And suddenly Ned Stark was gone. He didn't die that day. He was rescued. Varys, the spider, had planned it. Not because he loved Ned Stark, but because he knew that the realm needed him alive. A war was coming. The realm was falling apart. And Varys believed only someone like Ned Stark could help hold it together. So Ned was smuggled out. For weeks he hid, moving from place to place, carried by shadows and whispers. He was not allowed to write to his children. He couldn't speak his name. To the world, Ned Stark was dead. But in truth, he was healing, waiting. He thought about his daughters, Sansa, trapped in the Red Keep, and Arya, missing somewhere in the city. He thought of his boys, Robb, leading the North in war, Bran and Rickon, still young, and Jon Snow, his quiet, brave boy at the wall. And in those dark months, Ned changed. He was still honorable, still just. But now he understood better. Sometimes honor wasn't enough. Sometimes, to protect your family, you had to become something harder. 3 years passed. The world had changed. Robb Stark had died at the Red Wedding. The North was in chaos. Ramsay Bolton ruled with fear. Jon Snow had risen in the Night's Watch, and Sansa, poor Sansa, had survived horrors no father would wish for his child. And that's when Ned returned. It wasn't easy. At first, the Northmen didn't believe it was really him. Some thought he was a ghost. Others thought it was a trick. But when they saw him, when they heard his voice, when they looked in his eyes, they knew. The North remembered. He found Sansa first. She was at Castle Black with Jon Snow after escaping Winterfell. When she saw him, she dropped to her knees, crying like a child. He held her close, whispering, "I'm here now. I'm so sorry I wasn't before." Jon stood frozen, not sure what to say. Ned turned to him and said, "You are not just a Snow, Jon. You are a Stark in every way that matters. I should have told you long ago." Together, the three of them, Ned, Jon, and Sansa, began to plan. Winterfell had to be taken back. Ramsay had to be stopped. The North needed to be united again. But this time, Ned wouldn't rush. He had learned patience. He had learned that honor without power was useless. He met with every northern house. He told them the truth about the Boltons, about what had happened to Robb, about what Sansa had survived. And the people listened, because he was Ned Stark and the North still loved him. But not everyone was with them. Some still feared the Boltons. Others thought Ned was weak, too old, too slow. Some even whispered that he had betrayed the North by living in hiding all this time. So Ned had to do something bold, something that would make the North believe again. He told Jon and Sansa, "We take back Winterfell, not just for us, but for every child who lost a home, for every woman who was beaten, for every man who died for loyalty." Sansa nodded. Her voice was firm. "For the North." Jon said nothing. He just looked at his sword, Longclaw, and tightened his grip. And with that, the plan began. They would gather allies. They would train soldiers. They would march through snow and blood. And they would make Ramsay Bolton pay. Snow fell like ash across the North. Thick and cold, it covered broken villages, silent woods, and blood-stained roads. But under the snow, something stirred, hope. The North had been quiet too long under Ramsay Bolton's terror. But now whispers spread like wildfire. Ned Stark lives. Some didn't believe it. Others dropped to their knees and wept. The man they called the Honor of the North had returned from the dead, not as a ghost, but as a leader, a father, a wolf who had learned to bite. Castle Black, fires burned all night. Jon, Sansa, and Ned worked day and night, meeting with bannermen, training tired soldiers, sending ravens to houses that once flew the Stark banner. But not all ravens brought good news. House Glover refused. House Serwyn was too afraid. House Umber? Already in the Bolton's pocket. It was Sansa who slammed her cup down one evening and said coldly, "These men loved Robb until he lost. Now they kneel to Ramsay out of fear. Let them." Ned looked at her. There was steel in her voice. She was no longer a scared girl in King's Landing. She was something else now, a Stark woman carved by fire. Jon leaned forward, tired but calm. "We still have the wildlings. And a few loyal houses. If we move smart, we can take Winterfell without needing the cowards." Ned shook his head. "I don't want another war that ends in another red wedding. We need not just soldiers, but the North itself to rise." Sansa stood. "Then give them something to rise for." So they did. The next morning, Ned rode to the ruins of Moat Cailin and had banners raised, old banners, the direwolf of House Stark, blowing in the wind for the first time in years. Then he made a speech not for lords but for small folk. He spoke of justice, of his son Robb, of Theon Greyjoy's betrayal, of Ramsay's cruelty, of the lies that broke the North. And then he raised Jon's hand to the sky. "This is Jon Snow, my son, not by blood, but by honor. A true leader. He has guarded the wall. He has faced death. And now he stands with me." Jon tried to step back, but Ned held him firm. "You may call him Snow, but I call him Wolf." The people roared. From Deepwood Motte to White Harbor, the message spread. House Stark is back. Meanwhile, inside Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton sat with cold eyes and cruel thoughts. He heard the rumors. Ned Stark alive? Impossible. Sansa alive and raising banners? Laughable. But then came a raven. And another. And another. Every message carried the same warning. The North remembers. Ramsay's smile cracked. He called for 500 more men to be brought from the Dreadfort. He tortured a messenger for speaking Ned's name. And when he saw the Stark banners rising on the horizon, he whispered, "Let them come." But it wasn't just soldiers heading for Winterfell. Arya Stark had heard the whispers too. Far away in Braavos, she stood in front of the faceless men and made a choice. She would not be no one. She was Arya of House Stark, and her family needed her. She set her list aside and began the long journey home. Back in the North, Jon trained the new recruits. Sansa met with the northern women, urging them to stand strong. And Ned, he sat alone at times, staring into the fire, thinking of Catelyn, of Robb, of the lives lost because he once played the game too softly. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. One night, he looked at Jon and said, "You'll have to lead one day, maybe not from a throne, maybe not even from a castle, but men will follow you, because you do what's right, even when it hurts." Jon nodded but said nothing. Inside, he wondered what right really meant anymore. A few days later, they received word. The Bolton army was marching out to crush them before they reached Winterfell. Jon drew Longclaw. Sansa whispered, "It begins." And Ned simply said, "Then let them feel the bite of winter." The morning sky was the color of steel, and the snow fell harder than ever before. It was as if the North itself was bracing for the blood to come. They met near the old barrows, far from Winterfell's gates but close enough for the Bolton scouts to see the rising banners. House Stark's direwolf flew beside the wildling's sigil and the flags of a few brave northern houses. Mormont, Hornwood, Mazon, and a few smaller ones who still remembered honor. But it was still not enough. The Bolton army outnumbered them almost 2-1. Jon Snow stood at the front, his black cloak whipping in the wind. Ghost, his direwolf, stood beside him, growling low, sensing death in the air. Ned rode up next to him, his armor old but polished, the Stark sigil on his chest shining like ice. Sansa stood behind them on a hill, her red hair wild in the wind, her eyes colder than the snow. Jon turned to Ned. "This is madness. We don't have the numbers." Ned didn't flinch. "Neither did I at the Trident, or Robert when he stormed the Capitol. But the right cause doesn't need numbers. It needs conviction." Sansa added, "And Ramsay doesn't have that. His men follow him out of fear." Ours follow us because they believe. Jon tightened his grip on Longclaw. Then let's give them a reason to believe. The horns blew. The snow turned to mist from the breath of thousands. And the two armies began to move. At the head of the Bolton army rode Ramsay Bolton himself, dressed in black furs, a smug smile on his lips, his eyes scanning the field like a hunter looking for wounded prey. He didn't see soldiers. He saw meat. The first clash was brutal. Screams tore through the cold. Steel rang against steel. Horses crashed. Men cried out in agony. Arrows rained like frozen death from the sky. Jon fought like a beast. Ghosts tore through the enemy ranks. The wildlings, led by Tormund, fought with rage only free men could understand. The Mormonts held the left flank like a wall of wolves. But the Boltons were well-trained and well-fed. They pushed hard, surrounding Jon's forces slowly, suffocating them in a ring of blood and iron. Jon was knocked from his horse, buried under bodies, gasping, choking. Blood and mud covered his face. The world felt like it was closing in. He clawed his way out, barely able to breathe. And then out of the mist came a sound. The horn blew again. But this time, it wasn't theirs. A second force thundered from the trees. Horses, men, banners flying high, the flayed man of House Karstark, burning, torn apart, and behind them the dire wolf, House Glover, House Serwyn, even the Umbers. They had come, not because they believed, but because Sansa Stark had sent them a piece of Ramsay's own horror, his tortured servant who had escaped. She had sent letters with the man's scars as proof of Ramsay's madness. They finally saw who the true enemy was. The Bolton army broke like glass. Ramsay saw his men falling around him. He tried to turn, but a spear struck his horse. He fell hard, crawled through the snow, blood in his mouth, trying to reach his guards. And then he heard it. Footsteps. He turned and saw Ned Stark. Ned dismounted slowly. His face was calm. His eyes were sharp. He didn't say a word. Ramsay spat. "You're supposed to be dead." Ned replied, "So were you. Inside, you've been dead a long time." Ramsay reached for a blade, but it was too late. Ned's sword came down with finality. Not in rage, not in cruelty, but in justice. The field was quiet. The battle was over. Jon stood, bruised and bleeding, as men cheered his name. Sansa walked through the snow, her eyes finding the flayed banners burning. She didn't smile. She simply whispered, "Winterfell is ours." And Ned, he knelt in the snow, touching the frozen ground of the north. "I'm home," he whispered. But the war wasn't over yet. Because far to the south, Queen Cersei had received word. And in the cold beyond the wall, something darker had already begun to move. Winterfell was theirs again, but it didn't feel the same. The halls were cold. The stones remembered screams. The walls had seen betrayal, blood, and burning banners. No amount of cleaning could wipe away what Ramsay had done. But still they had won. Jon, bruised and tired, walked the corridors slowly, remembering the last time he'd been here, when he was just the bastard. Now men bowed to him, children stared with awe, and the North whispered his name beside Ned Stark's. But Jon didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a ghost. Ned sat in the godswood under the heart tree, eyes closed. As the red leaves fell around him like slow snow, he prayed, not for victory, but for forgiveness. He whispered names into the wind: Robb, Catelyn, Rickon, Bran, Arya, ghosts, some gone, some lost, all wounded by the world he had failed to protect. Sansa walked through the castle with her head high. She gave orders to servants, oversaw the rebuilding, but she never smiled. She couldn't. Ramsay's shadow still lived inside her. She didn't speak of the pain. She didn't cry. She just worked, as if fixing stones could fix her soul. Then, one night, it all began to unravel. Jon was called to the crypts by Ned. They walked down in silence, torchlight flickering across old faces carved in stone. At Lyanna Stark's tomb, Ned stopped. He looked at Jon, his face pale, his hands trembling just a little. "I lied to you," he said quietly. Jon frowned. About what? Ned took a deep breath. You're not my son. Jon's heart stopped. What? You never were. You're Lioness, my sister, and her husband wasn't some random man. It was Rhaegar Targaryen. Jon stepped back, as if he'd been punched. You're saying I'm a Targaryen? Ned nodded. Your real name was Aegon. I changed it. I kept you safe. Because Robert would have killed you. Because your blood is fire and ice. Jon stared at the tomb, unable to breathe. Suddenly everything felt like a lie. His whole life, built on nothing. Ned put a hand on his shoulder. You're still a Stark to me, but the world may not see you that way. Sansa found out the next day. She was quiet when Jon told her, but her eyes changed, not with hate, with fear. You're the heir to the throne, she whispered. I don't want it. That won't matter when people find out. From the shadows, whispers began to spread. Not from Ned, not from Jon, but from others, loyal maesters who knew the old records. One raven, one wrong word, and the entire realm could change again. While Jon struggled with truth, Ned met with the bannermen in the Great Hall. They pledged loyalty, but now many bent the knee to Jon, not him. The old lion was back, yes, but the wolf cub had become a king in the North's heart. That night, Ned stood at the battlements and looked to the wall. A storm was coming, but not of men. Reports came from the Night's Watch, wildlings disappearing, dead men walking, a white fog moving south, and one word carved into the frozen body of a ranger. Winter. Arya finally arrived, silent as death, her blade sharp, her eyes colder than the snow. She hugged Jon tightly, hugged Sansa longer, and when she saw Ned, she stared, like she wasn't sure if it was real. Then she whispered, I thought you were a ghost. He smiled, touching her face. Maybe I am. But Arya wasn't the same girl he remembered. She looked like she had stared into death, and made it blink first. There's something worse coming than Lannisters or Boltons, she said. And she was right. Because miles beyond the wall, the Night King stood on a ridge of ice, his army behind him, silent, waiting. And in the middle of his ranks marched a massive creature. Part dragon, part ice, its wings tattered and dead. The dead had a dragon now, and Winterfell was next. The wind howled louder now. It wasn't just winter, it was a warning. From the wall, ravens flew like dying stars, each carrying the same message. The dead are marching. Jon stood at the war table inside Winterfell's great hall, staring at the rough map of the north. His jaw was clenched tight, his knuckles white against the wood. We don't have enough men, he said. Arya leaned over the table. Then we fight like wolves. Sansa shook her head. Wolves die when they're outnumbered. Ned looked at them both, then at Jon. You know what we must do. Jon's face darkened. I'm not bending the knee to Daenerys. She has dragons, Sansa snapped, and armies. Without her, we die. Arya folded her arms. We're already dead if we let another Targaryen into the north. Jon's voice dropped low. I am a Targaryen. Silence. Sansa looked at him like seeing him for the first time again. The firelight flickered in her eyes, but no warmth reached them. Ned cleared his throat. We're not talking about thrones. We're talking about survival. Send a raven to Dragonstone. Ask for her help. Jon nodded slowly, the weight of the truth still crushing his chest. But he didn't send a raven. He rode out himself. He took Davos, Tormund, and a few men north, straight to Eastwatch where the wall had fallen. There, in the frozen ruins, he saw them. Thousands of dead, marching slow, cold, relentless. And above them, the undead dragon. Its wings spread wide, its roar sounding like 1,000 knives. Jon knew then, words wouldn't save them. Fire would. Back at Winterfell, Sansa took charge. She strengthened the walls, organized supplies, turned scared farmers into fighters. She sent out ravens to every corner of the north. But no help came. No food from the Riverlands. No word from the Vale. And worst of all, the south remained silent. Because in King's Landing, Queen Cersei had received Jon's letter. And she laughed. Let the North freeze, she told Jaime. The longer they fight the dead, the weaker they become. When they fall, we take the rest. Jaime stared at her with tired eyes. You'd let the dead win? Cersei smirked. They'll never reach us. But she was wrong. Back at Winterfell, Ned walked alone again. He looked at the walls, the land, the old trees. The last time he had been here, his children were still children. His wife still lived. His name was still clean. Now, he had faked his death, lied to the world, hid the truth about Jon. And worse, he knew what he had to do next would break his honor completely. Arya stood behind him. You're thinking of killing someone, she said softly. He didn't answer. You always said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. So who's your sword for this time? He turned. If the truth about Jon spreads, it could split the North. They'll see him as a Targaryen, not a Stark. And you want me to kill whoever spreads it. He didn't deny it. Arya stared at him. You're becoming like them, she said quietly. Little finger. Varys. Playing the shadows. Ned's voice cracked. I'm trying to save what's left of this family. Arya nodded. So am I. But I don't know who we're saving anymore. That night, Jon returned. Shaken, frostbitten, his voice hoarse. I've seen the army. We don't have days. We have hours. Behind him, a shadow fell over the castle. Daenerys Targaryen. She arrived with 2 dragons, and her eyes locked on Jon immediately. But Sansa stepped forward. You've come to the North. You'll respect our ways. Daenerys smiled coldly. If your way is dying, I'd rather not. Tension cracked the air like lightning. Ned stepped between them. We need each other. We don't have time for pride. But pride was already poisoning the room. Jon said nothing, because now Daenerys looked at him, not just as a threat, but as something worse. A rival. She had heard the whispers too, about who Jon really was, about his claim. And somewhere in the night sky, the dead kept marching, dragging winter with them. The wind screamed over Winterfell's walls, carrying a cold that didn't feel natural. It wasn't just winter anymore. It was death. And it was here. The sky above turned black, the stars gone. No moon, just a terrible silence before the storm. Jon stood on the battlements with Daenerys beside him, her dragons circling above. He glanced at her, searching for the warmth he had once felt. But her eyes were distant now, cold, not from fear but something else. She had learned the truth about him, that he was Aegon Targaryen, that his blood gave him a better claim than hers. They hadn't spoken of it yet. Not really. Not the way they needed to. But tonight wasn't for answers. It was for war. Ned walked among the soldiers in the courtyard. Old men, boys barely grown, maids holding swords for the first time. He didn't speak like a commander. He didn't shout. He just met eyes, gave nods, put a hand on a shoulder here, a quiet word there. And everywhere he went, they stood a little straighter. Sansa remained in the crypts, with the children and the weak. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled. She had seen too much to believe in safety anymore. Arya vanished into the shadows. She wasn't meant to fight in open war. She was made for silence, for darkness. She had one name on her lips, Night King. Then the horn blew. The first scream came from the woods. Then the drums of the dead, thousands of them, moving like a wave, cold, broken, soulless. Their eyes glowed with that terrible blue, and behind them, like a god of death, the Night King rode his dragon, its frost breath burning the trees white as bone. The battle began. Arrows flew. The unsullied formed walls. The wildlings screamed their war cries. Jon mounted Regal, his dragon, and took to the sky, trying to intercept the undead beast above. Daenerys followed on Drogon, her scream lost in the roar of wings. It was chaos. Men screamed and fell. The dead rose again seconds later. The front lines collapsed. No wall, no steel could hold them back for long. On the ground, Ned fought like the old wolf he was, shoulder to shoulder with Tormund, Davos, even Gendry swinging a hammer like Robert once had. He moved slower than he used to, but every strike he landed was final. He looked up once, and saw the Night King staring down at him from the sky, as if he remembered him, as if this war was personal. In the crypts, the dead began to stir. That was Ramses' last curse. He had filled the tombs with the unburied bones with no rest, and now they clawed their way out. Sansa grabbed a blade and defended children with her own hands. She sliced, screamed, ordered survivors to higher ground. She became the Lady of Winterfell not in ceremony, but in blood. Arya found herself alone in the library, surrounded by whites. She didn't breathe, moved like a shadow, killed without sound. Then she saw him, the Night King. He walked through the battlefield slowly, untouchable. Arrows melted, swords froze, dragons screamed above him, but he kept moving, toward the Godswood, toward Bran, because Bran was bait. They had placed him under the heart tree, the last green seer, the memory of the world. A lure. Jon saw it too late. He broke from the sky, pushing Regal down through the smoke and fire. But another dragon struck. Viserion, the dead beast, slammed into him mid-air. Regal shrieked. The two beasts fell through the storm, crashing into the ground. Jon rolled from the wreckage, blood pouring from his mouth, his leg broken. He crawled, dragging himself across the ice, toward the Godswood. Daenerys saw it too. She flew Drogon low, fire pouring from his mouth, but the Night King raised a single hand. The flames parted around him like water. He looked up at her, and smiled. Then he threw his spear. Drogon cried out. The beast spiraled, crashing to the ground. Daenerys tumbled through snow and death. And the Night King kept walking, toward Bran, toward the heart of Winterfell, toward victory. The Godswood was silent. Not even the wind dared enter the circle of weirwood trees now. At the heart of it, beneath the ancient white branches, Bran Stark sat alone. His eyes white, his mind far away. He was watching. Everything. Memories of Westeros played inside his head like a storm. But the one memory that mattered most, the one he couldn't change, was the sound of ice cracking under 1,000 bones. The Night King stepped through the trees. Calm, cold, invincible. Jon was crawling across the snow, one leg dragging, blood pouring from his mouth. He could see the Godswood, could see Bran alone, still bait. But he wouldn't make it in time. Daenerys staggered through the ruins. Her armor burned, her hands bloodied. Drogon was somewhere behind her, wounded but alive. She screamed Jon's name, but only fire answered her. Then a flash. Arya Stark, silent as breath, dropped from the trees behind the Night King, Valyrian dagger in hand. But he turned too fast. He caught her midair by the throat, slammed her to the ground. Her blade skittered across the ice. He raised his sword, ready to end her. That's when Ned Stark stepped into the Godswood, sword in hand. Not a ghost, not a memory, but a man ready to die for his children. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He just attacked. Steel met ice. The Night King blocked his strike with inhuman speed. Their swords clashed, frost burning the air. Ned moved with the fury of a father, but the Night King was faster, stronger, unnatural. The second blow shattered Ned's blade. The third slammed him into the snow. Arya gasped, crawling toward her blade. Bran still sat still, eyes white, lost in the weirwood net. The Night King stood over Ned, silent, like death itself. Then he raised his sword. But before it fell, Bran's eyes snapped open. No! And from the trees, something ancient stirred. A shadow moved, tall, thin, glowing faintly. Leaf, one of the last children of the forest. She stepped into the Godswood holding a flame of green fire in her hands. Wildfire mixed with dragon glass. The Night King turned. She hurled the flame. It struck the ground between them and exploded in light and heat. The fire roared up into the trees. Ice cracked. The Night King stumbled backward. Arya leapt. This time he didn't catch her. She grabbed the Valyrian blade, rolled forward, and plunged it into his chest. Not with rage, but with silence. He looked at her, and for the first time, he blinked. then shattered. The ice burst like glass. The whites across the field collapsed, lifeless. Viserion, the undead dragon, let out a final roar and fell from the sky, dead again. The battle was over. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was grief. Ned Stark lay still, broken and dying. Arya dropped beside him, her hands shaking. "Father," he coughed, blood on his lips. "You saved us. The North remembers." Sansa arrived a moment later, her dress torn, her blade bloodied. When she saw her father on the ground, she fell to her knees. Jon stumbled into the godswood, his body barely holding together. He saw the others, but only looked at Ned. He knelt. Ned reached out and took his hand. "There's something else I must tell you," he whispered. Jon leaned closer, but Ned looked at Daenerys. And then he didn't speak. He chose silence. He let the secret die with him, because the war was over, and Jon deserved peace, not another throne. Ned Stark, Warden of the North, father of wolves, died beneath the heart tree, in the home he fought so long to protect. No songs were sung that night, only the crackle of burning ice, only the sound of a family, broken and bleeding, but still standing. The snow had stopped falling. For the first time in days, the wind grew quiet, like even the North was holding its breath. Winterfell stood, scarred and burned, but alive. The fires were still being put out. The dead were still being buried. There were no celebrations, no cheering crowds, just the silence of survival. In the Godswood, they buried Eddard Stark beneath the heart tree. His body wrapped in wolf furs, sword laid across his chest, eyes closed like he was finally resting. Jon watched the burial without speaking. So did Arya, her face blank, her hands clenched. Sansa did not cry. She had no tears left. After the grave was sealed, they stood together, the last of House Stark. Arya, Jon, Sansa, Bran. For pieces of a family broken by war and lies. Inside the great hall, the surviving lords of the North gathered. The banners of burned houses hung beside fresh ones stitched in blood. A new North had to rise now, one not ruled by fear, or dragons, or dead kings. Sansa stood before them in a dress of gray and black, the direwolf sigil on her chest. Her voice was steady as stone. "The North has bled for every crown. We followed the South and we were burned for it. My brother Robb died for it. My sister was hunted for it. My father was executed for it. No more." She looked around the room, her voice low but clear. "We will not kneel to Dragonstone. We will not kneel to King's Landing. We will kneel only to the North." Some nodded. Some hesitated. Then Lord Manderly stood. "The North remembers." Then House Mormont. "The North stands." Then the rest. One by one. Voice after voice. "The North remembers." They turned to Jon Snow, expecting him to speak. But he shook his head. "I didn't fight for a crown," he said. "I fought for the living." "You're the heir," someone shouted. Jon froze. The words were out. The truth spoken too loudly now to ignore. Daenerys stood at the edge of the hall, watching. She had come, despite Sansa's warning. She had helped defeat the Night King. She had lost one dragon, but her eyes were colder than ever. Jon looked at her, then at the people. "I never wanted power," he said. "But if I must serve the North, I will." Sansa stepped forward. "The North is free, but we will not forget who saved us." She looked at Jon, and despite the fear in her heart, she nodded. "We name Jon Snow, King in the North." Voices rose. Banners lifted. The words filled the hall again. "King in the North." Jon stood still, as if the weight of the words was a chain around his neck. He wasn't a Stark. He wasn't a Snow. He wasn't even sure he was a Targaryen. He was just Jon. But he accepted the crown anyway. Not for himself. For Ned. For Robb. For the North. That night, Daenerys asked to speak with him alone. "You're the rightful heir," she said, her voice quiet, "to the Iron Throne." "I don't want it," Jon replied, "but others will push you to take it." He looked at her. Then burn the throne. But she didn't smile. You scare them, she said. They love you more than me. Jon stepped closer. They fear you. That's not the same. Her eyes turned cold. I fought for this. Bled for it. Lost for it. Jon sighed. Maybe that's why you shouldn't rule. You don't see the cost anymore. She left him that night. With no kiss. No goodbye. And the next morning, she was gone. Drogon carrying her away into the east. Maybe to rebuild. Maybe to return. No one knew. Arya didn't stay either. There's nothing left here for me, she said. I'm not made for castles and lords. She kissed Jon on the cheek, hugged Sansa tightly, and disappeared into the west. She left no map, no trail. Only her name and her blade. Bran remained in Winterfell, quiet and watching, always watching. Some said he was no longer a Stark, but something else. Something old. And Sansa, she stayed. She ruled beside Jon, not beneath him. She rebuilt the North one stone at a time. And the people whispered her name with respect and fear. The Lady Wolf. Jon stood on the walls of Winterfell years later, watching snow fall again. Ghost at his side. Sword on his back. He wore no crown now. Only the scars of the war, and the silence of a man who had lost everything, but still chose to fight. A raven landed beside him, black wings sharp against the white snow. He didn't read the message it brought. He only looked north, beyond the trees, because Jon Snow knew peace never lasted long. And the North always remembered.